Hi, folks. This is Emily Motter with Hospitality Minnesota, and today we are here with Stephen Cohen of Stephen Cohen Law.
Hi, I'm Stephen Cohen, solo practice attorney. I practice in the areas of business and real estate. Large proportion of my clients are in the restaurant and retail sectors. My practice is pretty national, so I'm getting a pretty good view of what's happening around the country, both for tenants and for landlords. I also represent a few small landlords who own strip centers, so I'm kind of seeing both sides of the equation. It's a very difficult time for everybody, but I am witnessing that people are being somewhat cooperative and trying to be helpful in the process.
Great. That's great to hear, and we really appreciate you bringing that perspective to all of our members. So, first question I have for you today. If I'm a business owner and I've had to close my business or drastically reduce my hours, should I be asking my landlord for rent relief?
Yeah, and the answer to that is definitely yes. You should not. You should be asking for rent relief. You should not wait until your rent is due. You should not wait for a default letter. You should not wait for a phone call. It's time to pick up the phone and call your landlord right now and say, I'm closed, or my business is off, or my business is soft, and I'm going to need some help. Landlords are, I'm going to say, expecting those calls. So you should definitely be looking for help, and you should be looking for help. You should be proactive and looking for help now.
And you think that that would apply whether you've closed or had to just cut back on service or hours or anything like that?
Yes, I think the circumstances will be different. Obviously, if you're closed, if you've been mandated to be closed by your state law, then you're going to use that as the entryway into your conversation. If you haven't been mandated to close, but you did out of safety concerns or because you have no business, then you want to talk about that. If you're not closed, but your business is way off, or you're doing delivery only, then about that. But in any of those circumstances, the landlord is going to understand and has to understand that your business is off and that you're not going to be in a position to pay the kind of occupancy and rent charges that you've been paying previously.
Got it. Okay. So I'm going to call my landlord and I'm going to ask them for rent relief. What specifically should I be asking them for?
Okay, well, it's a great question, and that's the question I'm getting all the time now. And I've seen people, I've seen kind of the full spectrum of things where people ask for 1 month's forbearance and say, I can't pay, but I'll pay you next month. Some of the national chains are going out and asking for rent relief through the end of the year. What I'm typically advising people is that given the quick, rapid changing circumstances that we're in, don't ask for too much. What I'm basically advising my clients is ask for, if you have paid March and you haven't paid April, ask for a break on April rent and make it clear you might have to come back and ask for a break for May or for June, depending on how long this thing lasts. But I think that people come out and ask for 120 days of rent abatement or rent abatement for the end of the year. They're going to get some resistance from the landlords, because the landlords are going to say, well, we don't know how long you're going to be closed. We don't know how long this is going to last. We don't know how long it's going to affect your business, and I'm not going to give you more than I have to. So I want to work with you, but let's just do this 1 month at a time. So I'm finding that the clients of mine that are asking for 1 month rent abatement or 30 days rent abatement are getting a lot of success, and the ones that are asking more than that are getting some resistance. And you might want to sit there and fight it out for a few months and not pay while you're fighting it out. But I think that the easier way to go is kind of take this 1 month at a time.
That makes sense. I've got two vocab questions for you. You mentioned a forbearance and an abatement. Yes. Can you just explain what those are?
Oh, I'm sorry, you broke up. Could you say that again?
Sure. Just two terms I was hoping you could clarify. You mentioned a forbearance and you mentioned an abatement. Can you just explain what those are for those of us who don't know?
Sure. So forbearance is a very often used in lending terms, but it basically means that the lender or the landlord is going to allow you not to pay. And it generally means we're not going to pursue you if you don't pay. You're still obligated to pay, but we're not going to do anything about it if you don't. And so it's kind of a way of the landlord standing down and saying, look, you still owe me the rent, but for the next month or the next 2 months, I'm not going to do anything about it, which basically means you're going to have to deal with that a little bit later on down the pike. An abatement is more of a specific remedy where the landlord would say to you, look, we're going to abate rent for a month, which means we're not going to require you to pay rent for that month. And very often that will be documented in a loan modification, in a lease modification or amendment, or some other documentation where the landlord actually says, we're amending your lease. You don't have to pay April rent. And we're going to take that amount and we're going to make it up some other way. Does that clarify it?
That does. Thank you. And then another follow-up question about that. Have you seen, or do you know if there are any like plans or options that landlords are offering other than abatements? And then do you have any tips on how to navigate those offers if your landlord counters with an offer like that?
I'm sorry, you said if there are other plans other than abatements or forbearances?
Yeah.
That's all I'm really seeing right now. The real question becomes, how does that money get paid back at some point, and how does that money get paid back? And I'm seeing a lot of creativity on that. Some landlords are asking that the amount of the rent, if they give a 1 month abatement, it gets tacked on to the end of the lease. And so you have one more month of term at the end of the lease, and you pay rent then. That would help the landlord keep the value of their real estate because they're still getting the full amount of their rent over the term of the lease. I've also seen where landlords say, don't pay me the rent for the month, and we will take that amount and we'll collect it over the next 12 months after you open, and spread it out over a period of time that way. Some tenants are asking for just, for an abatement and say there's no paying back. And some landlords are going to agree to that. Certainly that's the first approach you want to take as a restaurant or a tenant. But if you do have to pay it back over a period of time, it's not unfair. And, as I just outlined, there's a couple of different ways to do that.
Great. That's super helpful. So you've talked about kind of ways to have to potentially make up the month or two of rent that you're asking for forgiveness on for the time being. Is there anything else that as the renter that you might need to give up in order to secure an abatement or concede?
Well, it's a great question. Anytime you go ask your landlord for something, they usually come back with something that they want. So it's probably at some point or another going to raise questions of, amending the lease to extend the term or make you exercise an option if you're coming up on your option date, or if there have been other lingering issues between the landlord and tenant, they will probably be brought up at this point. Anytime you want to make a change to your lease, it usually provokes a bigger discussion or of I'm going to call cleanup items of things that have been kind of hanging out there between the parties that need to be resolved. So you kind of need to be prepared for that. And I guess along with that, I will say, if you've been suffering all along and you haven't been paying your rent or you're late on rent, these discussions are going to go a lot harder than, if you've been a good tenant paying your rent as you go along.
That actually is a great segue for my next question, which is, what if I think that my business is not going to be able to reopen, if we're not going to be able to weather this kind of short-term storm? What do you suggest there?
Emily, that's a great question. And there are plenty of players who are in that position where maybe they've been struggling all along, or they've been on a break even for a while and they've been sweating it out, trying to make it to the end. And at this point, does it really pay to try to, survive until you reopen, or do you say, this is it, I'm not going to reopen? If that's the case, then, you can ask for an abatement just to get some breathing room, but ultimately you're going to have a bigger conversation with your landlord about an early lease termination. Those conversations are never easy, even in the best of times. Now they're going to be even more difficult because the landlords are not anxious to take their property back. They don't know if they can lease it to anybody. So they're not going to be anxious to let you off the hook. On the other hand, if it's very clear that you are not going to reopen, then the parties might as well deal with that now and say, okay, look, the space is going to go dark. Eventually, the landlord's going to take it back. Now it's just a question of money. If, you know, how much money does the tenant have to pay to get out of it? You know, it might pay to wait 30 days or 60 days to have that conversation when we're in a hopefully a little bit of a calmer environment. But it probably doesn't hurt to start the conversation now, just to put it out there that you're not planning on reopening. Better let the landlord know sooner than later. Maybe they do have some alternative plans for the space.
Okay. So should I, if I go to have this conversation with my landlord, should I engage a professional to help me negotiate this?
I think that's a very personal question for each operator. Some operators are very comfortable picking up the phone and talking to their landlord, pleading their case and trying to make arrangements for their rent. There's a couple circumstances where it would make sense to hire a professional. If you have multiple units and there's a lot of landlords to call, you know, that could be quite an undertaking if you're also scrambling to you know, take care of all the other issues that you have when you're in this kind of closed down mode. So sometimes some clients are downloading that effort to outside professionals. The other situation is where you're just not comfortable having those conversations with your landlord and you prefer to have a third party represent you in that. Third party can do it without emotion and can be reasonable, and the landlords are not going to be difficult with a third party. They understand the situation and they've been through the situation before. And so sometimes having a seasoned neutral party doing it on your behalf can be very helpful. You will at least find out what the landlord's willing to do and able to do, and they may sometimes be more open about their position with a third party than they will be with their tenants directly. But certainly, you know, if you can save the money, do it yourself. You're comfortable doing it yourself. My advice there would be is if you do get to some arrangement with your landlord, just make sure that it's documented, either by a letter signed by the parties or an amendment to the lease. But, you know, it's all well and fine to have a feel-good conversation on the phone, but you want to make sure that something's on paper and that you've got that documented.
Great. So whether I decide to do this on my own or if I engage a third party to help me negotiate, what kind of information should I prepare to go into this conversation?
Yeah, that's a good question too, because you really do want to be prepared. So first of all, make sure that you have all your facts right. You know, if you have multiple units, which ones are closed, which ones are opening, are still open, which ones can do delivery, which ones can't. You know, how much of your staff have you laid off? You know, paint the picture realistically for what you've done to take care of yourself. Have you talked to your own lender? Have you talked to, you know, have you looked into getting an SBA loan? Have you laid off your staff? You know, be prepared to tell them that you're not taking a salary. You know, tell the landlord all the things that you're doing to try to make things work on your end, so you're not just looking for a handout and you know, trying to put it all on the landlord. That's really important information to provide. If you have a P&L, you know, or an operating statement for what the restaurant has been doing and what you're doing now, you know, the more financial information you can get for the landlord, the better. So I would definitely be prepared to have all that information so you have some credibility when you call them and they see that you're really trying to make things work. They'll be more willing to work with you if you've done that.
Great. All right, and I have one last question for you. What if I own my space rather than rent it? What steps can I take to negotiate a mortgage payment as opposed to a lease payment?
I think the situation is very similar. You're going to call your bank and you're going to explain the situation to the bank just like you would to your landlord. You know, banks are showing a large degree of flexibility, which, you know, we've not really seen before. They probably do not have, or they do not have as much flexibility as a lot of the landlords have, because it's more of a regulated industry, and they have more pressure on their side than some of the landlords do. Would have the very same conversation, and in that case, you're not going to be talking about a lease amendment, but you may be looking for a forbearance. They may say, listen, we'll give you a month or 2 months or 3 months of no payments, and then we'll tack it onto the backside of your mortgage. It's definitely a conversation that you should have, and it's really not that different than the conversation you'd have with a landlord.
Got it. All right. Well, that's all the questions I have today. Thank you, Stephen, for taking this time with us and kind of walking us through this process. April 1st is coming up, so it's good to get this information out to folks while there's still a little bit of time to proactively take some steps with their landlords.
Yeah, well, thank you, and I wish everybody good luck through these difficult times. And my parting advice to people is, when you're in this process, be courageous and be courteous, because everybody's in this together, and it pays to try and be cooperative with your landlords and your lenders.
Great. Thank you so much, Stephen. Have a good one.
Thank you.